Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm Robbie Rhino, and in today's video I have a full review for you of the AMOLAD, which stands for A Matter of Life and Death, and this is the Cold War offering with the Metal Fest Act 3 Iron Maiden collaboration. It's an independent Alliance Era 2 medium tank, and in today's video I'll be going over all of the stats, comparing to 3 other Era 2 premium vehicles. I'll show you the commander and equipment setup I've decided to use, and also the armour profile of this vehicle, following up with 3 gameplays to demonstrate how this vehicle performs on the battlefield. But this is the vehicle in the artwork Wargaming have put up on the website. Comes with a pretty decent skin, although it is fairly muted, and a little flag there. Looks like it's got lots of spaced armour on the front and a side skirt there, so hopefully that protects against ATGMs. And this is a little bit of a mismatch of tanks. It's got the T-72A's turret, the Chieftain Mark 6's gun, and the Centurion Mark 9's hull. So yeah, we'll have to see how that sort of combines together on the battlefield. But let's first have a look at the price. You can get all of these bundles I'm going to be talking about until the 3rd of October from today, which is the 12th of September. If you wanted to pick up this vehicle in the Mega Bundle, which comes with all of the Iron Maiden commanders, and also the Tier 8 offering, which is a World War II Tier 8 Soviet medium tank, the Senjutsu TO-55. If you wanted to get this bundle, 30,000 gold, 30% savings, but still a hell of a lot of money, and only worth it if you really love Iron Maiden and World of Tanks console, and you know you can't miss out on this bundle. But if you just wanted the tank on its own, it's still pretty pricey at 11,400 gold, and I'll tell you right now, in my opinion, there's probably better tanks out there for most of the player base. However, it can still have some good games, as we're going to see a little later on. We're now going to skip over to Excel, have a look at the stats of the AMOLAD, which I have here on the left, and we're going to be comparing to 3 other vehicles in today's video. 2 premium medium tanks in the form of the WZ-122 and the Leopard VT2, and 1 heavy tank, which is a kind of hybrid medium/heavy tank, the Chieftain Hybrid 120. All of these have 120mm caliber guns, and a good indication of how the AMOLAD will hold up on the battlefield. So before we get stuck into talking about the stats and the bonuses of the AMOLAD, if you haven't seen my reviews before, green is the best stat, red is the worst, orange is somewhere in between, and yellow is with my equipment and commander setup applied to the base stats, which I'll talk you through that and the armor profile a little later on, just before the replays. However, let's get looking at the stats of the AMOLAD, and we're going to start with the bonuses, as it is a premium vehicle. 55% silver bonus, 15% XP bonus, and a command bonus of 15%. As you can see, joint best in terms of silver earning. The best out of all these tanks in terms of commander XP bonus is the WZ-122. However, you still have a nice 15% on the AMOLAD, and in terms of XP, somewhere in the middle, not as bad as the WZ, but not as good as the VT2 and the Hybrid 120, but still respectable. You'll be earning some nice XP, some good crew training, and most importantly of all, some nice silver earning. And now we're going to scroll on, have a look at the raw stats, starting with the hit points. The AMOLAD has 2,650, so a relatively average kind of amount of hit points for an Era 2 sort of top tier, mid tier Era 2 tank. As you can see, not quite as good as the Leopard VT2 and the Hybrid 120. Bear in mind the Hybrid 120 is a heavy tank. However, you do beat the WZ-122 by just a little bit. You're definitely going to be needing a lot of those hit points during many of your battles, as we're going to get onto. The armor isn't too good later on. However, you do have enough to take multiple shots, and you have some spaced armor to protect against HESH, HE, and ATGM. So next up, view range 460 meters. As you can see, it is the worst of the bunch, and this tank is horrific for spotting for itself. Its concealment is also absolutely terrible, above sort of 400, nearly 410 meters still concealment, which is absolutely horrific. You get outspotted by pretty much everyone, and you can invest in boosting the view range up. However, you miss out on boosting other aspects of the tank, which I feel are more important to its playstyle. Far off the VT2 and the 120, and yeah, still behind the WZ-122, which was pretty blind as well. So definitely watch out for that on the battlefield. Next, we're going to talk about the mobility of the AMOLAD, and it's kind of a mismatch here. Some good news, some bad news, and some alright, as you can see designated by the colours. You have a 950 horsepower engine, I should say, a power to weight ratio of 18.65, top forward speed of 68.7 kilometers an hour, reverse speed of 34.6 kilometers an hour, hold reverse of 38 degrees a second, and lastly a turret reverse of 34 degrees a second. So in terms of the engine power, pretty much top of the comparison here, just falling behind the Hybrid 120 by 50 horsepower, but still pretty good. Power to weight ratio comparable to the WZ122 if you've played that vehicle or come across it on the battlefield. Slightly better than the Leopard VT2 because that has some pretty chunky armour on the turret. And lastly, you do fall behind the Hybrid 120 getting around the battlefield, and in my opinion the Hybrid 120 is one of the best Era 2 premium tanks. Very competitive, especially if you are a little bit more experienced with the game. You can get a lot out of that vehicle. Next, the forward speed, which is the best in this comparison, beating the VT2 and the Hybrid 120 by a little bit, and much better than the WZ122. And one of the best things about the AMOLAD is this reverse speed, 34.6 kilometers an hour. And if you invest in the mobility equipment, you can go backwards pretty quickly off of ridge lines, and sometimes you definitely need it because the gun depression is horrific, as we're going to see a little bit later on. Beats the WZ122 by a long way, and even beats the VT2 and 120 Hybrid 120 by a long way as well. However, the two downsides to the mobility of this vehicle are the hold reverse at 38 degrees a second. It can feel pretty sluggish turning, and it has some pretty bad terrain resistances, especially on soft. It feels a long time to get your hole round, so I definitely recommend investing in mobility equipment to improve that. The traction system improves that by 10%, and turret reverse even worse, 34 degrees a second. It can feel very sluggish, but gun handling skills will improve that. Falling behind the WZ122 and miles behind the VT2 and the Hybrid 120. So a little bit of a mixed bag there in terms of the AMOLAD's mobility. And now we're going to get on to its 120mm caliber gun. And remember, all of these guns here are 120mm caliber gun. If you just look at the picture there in terms of the colour, you can see that you do have the joint best alpha damage on this 120mm caliber gun, 530 on your standard APDS and premium APF SDS, the exact same as the Chieftain Hybrid 120, and you have some pretty tasty HESH rounds as well with 680mm. 680 alpha damage, I should say. It beats the WZ122's 120mm by a long way, and it even beats the Leopard VT2's 120mm by 20 hit points worth of damage. In terms of the penetration, you can see that it does have the joint best with the Leopard VT2 and the Hybrid 120 in terms of its standard penetration at 418mm. Pretty good for free-to-play players, and it can go through pretty much everything frontally that you come across, or it will struggle against things like the FV4-11. If you wanted to fire premium rounds, the APF SDS rounds on this vehicle, 483mm of premium penetration, much better than the WZ122, which of course does have 80 GMs as well, but we're just comparing the guns in this comparison. However, you do fall behind the Leopard VT2 at 504mm with its APF SDS rounds. Not too big a disparity there, but a little bit disappointing, and a little bit more penetration would have been nicer. Lastly, in terms of those HESH rounds, a lovely 290mm of penetration, same as the Hybrid 120, and it's much better than the HE rounds on the WZ122. Bear in mind that the third ammunition selection on the VT2 is heat. It has two APF SDS round, standard and premium, and third round is heat, so therefore the colour there is going to be green. It's going to be the best in this comparison in terms of its penetration at 490mm, but for HESH rounds, the AMOLAD's 290mm is still pretty decent for that whopping 280 alpha damage. There is an argument to be using the ammo swap skill or equipment on your equipment and commander setup. However, I don't choose to run it. I just carry a couple if I know I'm going to be coming across a lightly armoured light tank or a tank destroyer, or get up behind the medium and heavy tanks and shoot them in the rear. 290mm is more than enough to go through. Lastly, in terms of your speed, 1530 meters a second on your standard and premium rounds, which is okay, but it does fall behind things like the standard rounds on the WZ-122 or the standard and premium rounds on the Leopard VT2. It's still pretty good for sniping at mid to long ranges, but you will lose penetration over distance. It just had to give a little bit more lead than you would with some other tanks if you're used to how that gun performs, but yeah, it's not a deal breaker, just slightly annoying for this vehicle, and you do lose a lot of shell velocity with your HESH round, 660 meters a second. It's way behind the WZ-122, a lot behind the heat rounds of the VT2, and of course the same as the hybrid 120. So again, a little bit of a mixed bag there for the AMOLAD. Not the best shell velocity, still decent enough, very nice HESH rounds, best alpha damage, joint with the hybrid 120, and decent standard penetration. Next we're going to get on to the gun handling of all of these vehicles, starting with the aim time. 1.8 seconds with the AMOLAD, which is beaten by the hybrid 120, which has 1.7 seconds, but it's still a pretty decent aim time, and you'll usually get that down to a respectable level with your equipment and commander setup, better than the WZ-122 and the VT2. The accuracy is 0.31, which was a little bit disappointing on this vehicle, and it does feel incredibly derpy for me, even when I have applied my equipment and commander setup and got a 0.26 accuracy. It doesn't feel as good as the Chieftain Hybrid 120, which has best in class 0.27 accuracy, and it kind of feels more comparable to the WZ-122, which is the worst in this list at 0.36, or the VT2, which has 0.34, so it does feel quite derpy. I want to do everything I can to invest in my setup to improve the gun handling and DPM of the AMOLAD, as in my opinion this 120mm caliber gun is the best thing about the vehicle, and sometimes I feel like it's the only good thing about this vehicle, as you're going to see in the gameplay. In terms of your DPM, you have a pretty nice 3,742. The trick is just using that DPM because of the poor gun depression, as we're going to get onto in a minute. The best in this comparison is the Chieftain Hybrid 120 at just shy of 4,000 DPM, 3,975. But you do beat the WZ-122 and you beat the Leopard VT2 by a long way, over 600 DPM there. In terms of your reload, a base reload for 530 or 680 alpha damage is 8.5 seconds, which isn't as low as the 8 seconds on the Hybrid 120, but it does beat the Leopard VT2, and it's only slightly worse than the WZ-122, but bear in mind, you do have that nice high alpha damage. Ammo capacity, best in this comparison by 4 rounds. You have 54 rounds you carry into every battle. And now we get on to two of the worst aspects of the AMOLAD. The gun depression, 6 degrees, only worsened by the WZ-122. However, it's still horrific, very awkward to use on lots of different ridge lines, and because you are such a large vehicle with a flag on top and horrific concealment, poor view range, yeah, if you get caught out you lose a lot of hit points very quickly because the armour is trash, as we're going to get onto in just a little bit. And to top it off, that 14 degrees gun elevation, horrific for pointing your gun upwards if people are above you, miles behind the other 3 tanks in this comparison. So again, a little bit of a mixed bag. You have decent DPM and aim time, but accuracy feels quite derpy. You carry plenty of rounds, but gun depression and elevation pretty damn horrific on the AMOLAD. So that's it for the comparison part of today's review. I'm now going to talk you through my commander and my equipment setup, show you how that affects the stats of the AMOLAD. Then I'll take you to the garage, show you the armor profile of the AMOLAD, and then we'll get stuck into 3 gameplays. So what do I choose to run on the AMOLAD with my equipment? Well, I choose to run the advanced loader, the gun stabilizer and the traction system, and it's a really difficult choice with the AMOLAD to choose just what you want to improve, because in reality you just want to prove a little bit of everything. And in terms of my commander skills, I run the 6th Sense, Born Leader, Rapid Loading, Steady Aim, Rapid Aim, Snapshot, Armor Angling, Track Mechanic, and Off-Road Driving. So in terms of my commander skills, 6th Sense and Born Leader is standard, Rapid Loading to help that already pretty decent DPM, 3 gun handling skills, and arguably I should be using Run and Gun as well to improve it even further. I run Armor Angling because you just take a lot of damage in this vehicle, and reducing it by 5% can sometimes keep you in the battle. Track Mechanic because you have such a large front to this vehicle, and people can sometimes be trying to shoot the hull when they hit your tracks, and you don't want to be caught out in the open. And off-road driving to improve your handling on soft terrain and moderately soft terrain, because it just feels very sluggish, and that helps the whole traverse as well. And in terms of my equipment, I've gone with the advanced loader, again because the DPM is one of the best things about this vehicle and I'm trying to improve it as much as possible. Gun stabilizer, obvious to improve the accuracy, and the third skill slot is very hard, or equipment slot. I have toyed with using the ventilation to help the gun handling and DPM out even more. The advanced powertrain will be good to get going into position, however it's still relatively quickly, so traction system does help your max speed by 10%, but more importantly your chassis and your hull rotation by 10%, getting your arm around and using what little armour that the AMOLAD has. So what has that done to the base stats of the AMOLAD in terms of this comparison? Well, my view range has gone up to 480 meters, which is neither here nor there, not really a massive improvement, but I haven't chosen to improve that. I've just sort of lived with what it is and I'm playing it more like a support vehicle. In terms of my mobility, because I'm using the traction system and not the advanced powertrain, the engine power and power to rate stay the same, which are still pretty decent. Top forward speed gone up to 75.57 kilometers an hour. Reverse speed improved to 38.06 kilometers an hour, which is very, very nice. Trying to get off of ridge lines when you're trying to use that awkward 6 degrees off gun depression. Hull traverse has improved to 41.8 degrees a second, and turret traverse of all the gun handling skills improved to 39.36 degrees a second, so you can snap the turret round a little bit easier than you otherwise would. And lastly, in terms of the gun handling and DPM, aim times dropped to 1.73 seconds, which is very nice. Accuracy 0.26, which isn't great in itself and it still feels pretty derpy, but I didn't want to use the vents because I felt the traction system's more important to get into positions to try and use that 6 degrees off gun depression. In terms of the DPM, it's shot up quite a long way to 4,871, and quite a lot of tanks you can outtrade. However, a lot of other tanks do have armour they can use or concealment they can use against you, so sometimes that is negated by the strengths of other vehicles. And lastly, the reload has dropped to 6.53 seconds from 8.5 seconds, so 6.53 seconds for either 530 alpha damage or 680 alpha damage is pretty decent. So yeah, all in all, a pretty big mixed bag. Mobility can be a bit disappointing in terms of your traverse speeds. Gun depression, gun elevation is horrific. The actual gun, when you hit and penetrate, is very nice with decent enough shell velocity, good standard penetration, and nice alpha damage, best in class alpha damage, I should say, along with the Chieftain Hybrid 120. And you've seen how the commander and equipment setup update the stats of this vehicle. We're now going to head on into the garage. I'll show you the armor profile of the AMOLAD, as it's relatively unique and there are some things you might want to know if you're trying to take this out on the battlefield in another vehicle, or you're trying to survive in this vehicle itself. And then we'll get stuck into 3 gameplay, so I'll see you over in the garage in just a little bit. So here we are in the garage, and we are going to have a look at the armor profile of the AMOLAD. As you can see, lots of spaced armor on the front, but in reality it isn't all too effective. It's kind of one of those vehicles where the armor sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, and if you're coming up against it, more often than not they'll get a miracle bounce or absorb your ATGM or your shell. That's just something that happens inside World of Tanks console. But first thing to note is look at the size of this vehicle, and with a horrific 6 degrees of gun depression, 14 degrees of gun elevation, very awkward to use. Combine that with horrific view range and really, really horrific concealment. It's kind of a recipe for disaster on a lot of maps, depending where, of course, you go or how many good players you have on your team. But the turret of the T-72A, the gun of the Chieftain Mark 6, and the hull of the Centurion Mark 9. We're going to start with the thickest part of the armour, which is this kind of bit on top of the turret. So this part can't be overmatched, which is a little bit of a bonus. Next, around the mantlet, 280mm. But again, with the penetration around in Era 2, a lot of tanks can just go straight through the front. It's quite rounded, so avoid hitting it at an angle, but flat on, if you're kind of level, a lot of tanks can just go straight through the front of this turret. Have these sections here at 260mm, and the front left and right of the curved section of the turret 235mm. Again, if you're shooting at an angle or you're underneath it, you can bounce. However, if you're flatter on like this shooting, you can just go straight through the front of this turret. The only plus side is that when you do find a good ridgeline which is hiding your massive hole, it's quite a small turret and quite hard to hit. Turret ring, 160mm of armour there. Front part of this sort of viewport to the front left, 150mm, a good option to shoot if this thing tries to face hug you. A lot of tanks will be taller than this vehicle or the same height and just go through the straight front of the turret or this cupola. It's not great to have another weak spot. The actual upper plate as a Centurion Mark 9, 120.7mm, and that's pretty poor in itself. As you can see, it is kind of angled, so at an extreme angle sometimes this would have bounced anyway, regardless of the spaced armour on the front of it. But that's where the upper plate is behind the spaced armour, because you can't see it when you have the visual of this tank. A little bit of armour there on the back of the turret, 120mm, and top of the cupola, 100mm. Again, a pretty big weak spot. You have some more armour there to the sides of the turret, but more often than not, unless you have really bad penetration or you're firing an autocannon, you're just going to go straight through this unless you fire it at an angle. The lower plate of this vehicle, as you can see, that's where it is if you don't know where it is from the when you're looking at the tank, because of all this spaced armour. Slanted again, 76mm, still pretty damn weak. And if you wanted to know where the lower plate is and you can't see it because of the model in game, you just shoot this box bit on the front, the lower box, the square box, and you're just going to be hitting the lower plate and going through. The sides of the tank are a little bit of a bonus to the armour at 50.8mm. You can side scrape pretty well against most things in this tank, and you have side skirt there, so you can try and bait people into shooting your sides of your tank. And there's no armour directly from the front, so you can't shoot the drive wheel and go into the side and penetrate this vehicle. You'll just track it in place. This is pretty much the only good thing about the armour in my opinion, apart from some of the spaced armour we're going to see on the front. As you can see, there's a little bit there at the front, 50mm of spaced armour. Actual roof of the turret towards the rear is 45mm of armour, and we'll just check how much penetration you need, or what calibre you need to overmatch this section here. You need to do 45 times by 3 plus 1, you'll need a 136mm calibre gun or higher to overmatch this section of the roof deck. In case you have that high of a caliber gun and you wanted to penetrate it, ATGMs could splash down onto this very nicely indeed. And now we get to the spaced armour section on the front of this vehicle, 40mm of spaced armour in front of the upper and lower plates. Sometimes if an ATGM kind of hits the side, it'll just absorb it anyway. And if you're shooting at this thing from the side, bear in mind it does protrude out beyond the tank. It's not a hitbox, it'll just absorb your shell and you won't do any damage. So if you're shooting at this thing, shoot like the drive wheel or shoot just the centre mass of the tank to make sure you penetrate and hit the side of this vehicle. But this is only really useful sometimes against ATGMs, but ATGMs with really good penetration can just go straight through this, and it's super annoying. It kind of defeats the purpose of having this ERA armour, the explosive reactive armour, on the front of this vehicle. The actual rear of the tank's 31mm, and then you have, again, two more space sections to the left and right of the section I have just shown you that cover it above the track. So if you're shooting like ATGMs into this, more often than not, this will get absorbed. These are the sections you don't want to shoot. What you want to shoot is ideally the side or the rear of the tank or the turret. However, if you have to shoot the front with ATGMs, the lower plate or upper plate in these sections here, and you can more often than not go through with the good ATGMs in Era 2. Next, the section here on the sort of roof deck, just below the gun, 28mm, but very hard to see with the model of this vehicle. Tracks themselves 25mm of armour, and there's not really much else to say. You have some sort of spaced armour here, composite armour protecting the sides of the turret, but again 15mm won't protect you against much, especially the ATGMs that are in Era 2. And lastly, some more blocks there on the side and rear of the turret. It can occasionally absorb. From my experience, it doesn't often do that. And 6mm of side skirts, which can help sort of bait into tracks and absorb some HE and maybe heat rounds. Don't shoot this thing with heat from the front or side when it's angled, because it will more often not be absorbed. But yeah, again, it's just more of an aesthetic thing. In my opinion, it doesn't really serve a purpose. So overall, what do you want to do to penetrate this tank? Well, if you have even average penetration, you can go straight for the upper or lower plate, which is the block, which I will show you now. If you want to penetrate from the front, you go through these sections here. You go the bottom block, go through the lower plate. The upper mid point, you go through the upper plate. You can go through the front of the turret with sort of 400mm plus of armour. If you're shooting this thing with ATGMs, you can go through the lower plate and that block I've just shown you. Ideally, you just want to get to the side of the vehicle, shoot the protruding part there of the top of the tank, or just get around the back and you will penetrate. You'll sometimes get your ATGMs absorbed from the front, or this composite armour on the side of rear of the turret. However, in my opinion, it hardly ever fails to go through. When it's angled and side scraping, you can occasionally bounce in this vehicle, but yeah, it's pretty poor. It works kind of 20% of the time from my experience. And yeah, that's all you need to know about the armour of the AMOLAD. So we're now going to head on into the first of 3 gameplays, so I'll see you over there in a jiffy. So we are into the first gameplay of today's video, and we are here on Westfield in the AMOLAD. We have spawned in the southwestern corner, and I'm going to be making my way down the 9-0 line. Reason being, this has horrific gun depression at 6 degrees, and it's a sort of opportunity for me to get a little bit of higher ground and shoot into the centre without having to overexpose my vehicle, and I can hide behind this ridge line in front of me and hopefully help the battle here in the centre of the map, but also down the eastern flank. And you can get a nice idea of the mobility now as we make our way into position, and it's all about finding positions where you can use this 6 degrees of gun depression and 14 degrees of gun elevation and make this 120mm caliber gun work, because that is the selling point to this vehicle, apart from the fact it is an Iron Maiden collaboration tank, because in my opinion it's just so awkward and annoying to use. The armour doesn't usually work, and yeah, you're so big, you get spotted, you have horrific concealment and view range, and yeah, unless you're a sort of player that has played for a little bit and you're a little bit experienced with how the game works, you probably won't do too great in this vehicle. I mean, I've played over 40,000 battles now and I still struggle quite a bit to get a gameplay in this vehicle. We have already taken quite a bit of damage. This FE4 211's coming. I'm kind of in a really difficult spot now. My only option is to go forward and hope I get out of harm's way. You do run the enhanced smokescreen, as you can see, as well as a large med and large repair kit. Smokescreen, because you're so big, sometimes I just want to hide myself and I want to be able to get away, just like we did there. You saw that when we did fire the gun, it worked really well. We've dealt 1597 damage and we've hardly fired many rounds at all. Blocked a little bit, showing you that the armour sometimes can block the occasional round. However, we've lost a hell of a lot of hit points. That 2,650 hit points doesn't last too long, so we had to relocate. The mobility is absolutely fine getting around in Era 2. You will get swarmed by some tanks that are just quicker than you, most of the light tanks and some of the medium and heavy tanks as well, but that's just kind of what it is. And in my opinion, I just want to try and play a support style kind of gameplay, a little bit more passive than I would in other vehicles, and just try and get into positions where I'm able to make this gun work, because you really do chunk the opponents down. And with my setup, I've got 4,871 DPM, which is more than enough to overpower quite a few vehicles. However, you have to make your shots count, because you don't have the armour to bounce like maybe some of the other heavy tanks and medium tanks do, and you don't have the concealment and mobility like the light tanks, so it can be a little bit of a struggle. You'll get in to see here, when you do get firing, you do some nice damage. Leopard 101 comes behind us. We've had to drop down underneath this viaduct. The Leopard 101 gets taken out by the BMP-1, and now it's all about trying to pick targets that are either not looking at me or that I know I can overpower. The M103A2 gets taken out by our friendly M60A2. We dodge an ATGM there, which would have probably finished me off in this game, and now we can put this 120mm caliber gun to work on this Chieftain. And you can see here, when you do get your gun firing, you do rack up that damage. It chunks your opponents down, and with the 55% silver bonus, you can have some pretty decent games. You could do some good things in this vehicle. It's not for me, it's definitely not one that I'm going to be purchasing, I'll tell you that right now, but if you love Iron Maiden and you don't really mind tanks with poor gun depression, yeah, you can make it work. It's just there are better tanks out there that are more user friendly and much more competitive. So in the time that I've waffled on, I've managed to pick up 5.1k direct damage in this game, 2000 assistance because we're relatively aggressive towards the mid and latter stages, and we've blocked 440. Sometimes it's just a little bit of a Hail Mary as to whether you block any damage, but this is kind of a typical game that I was having in the AMOLAD here, which is why I've put this gameplay in the video, because it's not particularly special. We finished in second place with a decent profit with or without a premium account. We finished with 5.7k direct damage, 2008 assistance. Around that kind of level was kind of the average I was getting, maybe even slightly below that. But the next two games are a little bit better, and what you can do in more favourable matchups when you find those good positions and get this gun singing. So we're going to head on over into the second gameplay right now. So now we are on Serene coast in the AMOLAD. We've spawned in the north, and I'm going to make my way down the sort of 1 and 2 line, trying to use the ridge lines over there, because I know they're enough to be able to use this 6 degrees of gun depression, and I know there's going to be some chances for me to shoot tanks that are trying to make their way into position. Getting there before everyone else, we're sort of keeping up with the friendly medium tank just behind us, and yeah, we're going to try and put this gun to work. I'm not going to be too passive in this gameplay and too scared to kind of expose myself, because you have to get the damage out if you want to have good games. However, you can see that even here the 6 degrees of gun depression is frustrating me. I haven't gone far enough right, so just reposition a little bit, poke over, and the gun feels okay. It can still feel quite derpy sometimes, and I've had many gameplays that you aren't going to see where the gun just does not seem to want to hit, and I think it's because the dispersion whilst you are moving isn't too good. Maybe run and gun would be a much better thing to take than something like armor angling or track mechanic, and it might have improved my gameplay experience. But yeah, it just still feels quite derpy sometimes and quite annoying. You can't get as pinpoint accurate as you would in something like the Chieftain Hybrid 120. But we've done 1050 damage. We haven't taken any damage so far. One enemy tank has been taken out, and it looks like there's hardly anyone down this flank, so I'm going to try and scout out the centre and the south. I have some tanks behind me which I'm trying to persuade to come and follow me, because if we can get down the south, clear it out, we can get behind those tanks that are pushing our base down the 8 and 9 lines, and then hopefully I can get some nice rear shots. And this tank really excels when you can use the DPM and you're fighting tanks that just aren't looking at you, or that they're, you know, looking at one of the tanks that you are making the push with. So we try and track that RDF LT there, which we managed to do so, penetrate him and get some nice tracking assistance. And now we are going to wait for our tanks to catch up with us a little bit, and then we're going to try and clear out the southern portion of this map and the enemy base before we try and turn our attention to the other tanks the other side. Waiting for my tanks there, 2 mediums following me, and then we're going to come round and I'm going to see what this tank is like if we do a little bit of ramming damage on this AMX-30B2. And yeah, thanks to the extra spaced armour and being a fairly chunky boy anyway, you can ram certain tanks for quite a lot of damage. Things like this RDF LT, if we had to ram him, we'd do a lot of damage. That 30B2, tanks that don't have much armour, you can ram quite substantially. You will take a little bit of damage. Just don't ram things like a MOBAT or an FE4-11, because you will regret it. And I speak from experience when I say that. But in this gameplay, we are now up to 3.7k direct damage, nearly 2000 assistance in the first 3 minutes of this battle. We've cleared the south, and then we can push down the eastern flank and try and get shots into the rear and sides of these vehicles that are threatening our base. We are up by 6 tanks, so we outnumber them 2 to 1, so I can be quite aggressive with my 1754 HP. And yeah, again, this is kind of standard AMOLAD gameplay. You just got to be a little bit more passive than you would be in something that has, you know, good armor or good gun depression, or can use its mobility and concealment and view range to outplay your opponents. But when you get into position, the gun, even though it feels quite derpy, is the best thing about this tank. And yeah, the DPM is what you want to try and maximize and also use when you are on the battlefield. So now we come up behind these vehicles. A little bit of lazy auto aiming at this distance isn't going to hurt anyone, especially from the side and the rear. But now I've gone trying to aim, went for the tracks but missed. He gets taken out by the AMX-13 SS-11 TCA, and now we can put some shells into these remaining vehicles. The T-72 AV is not too happy with me, he's coming after me. We're just going to try and take him out, get out of the way of our friendly light tank. He misses with his ATGM, and now we're going to chase this T-72 AV, bounce off the rear of that tank because World of Tanks console things. And yeah, unfortunately, this T-72 AV wants to take damage from everyone but me. We finally catch up with him. I have enough just to nudge him for a bit of damage, hoping we get the kill here. Unfortunately, we don't, and the last remaining RDF LT gets taken out by our friendly 30B2 Brina. So again, another pretty fast-paced game there. We finish MVP in this game with 3 kills, 6.7k direct damage, 1996 assistance. We get the second class mastery medal, 1529 base XP. Pretty decent game there. 320 blocks of the armor, again sort of working when it feels like, with a nice profit with or without a premium account. So that's it for this 4-minute 28 game there on Serene Coast. I'm now going to head on to the third and final gameplay of today's video. So now we are on Severogorsk in the final battle of today's video, and we spawned in the southeast. I'm going to make my way down the 1 and 2 line and try and use the high ground advantage to enemy tanks that are situated in the north of this map. Yeah, and see what this 120mm caliber gun can do. And you're going to see that in this gameplay, we're going to have to think a little bit about our positioning to the mid and latter stages. Going to have to retreat when necessary. We don't have the armor to hold back a massive push. You've got to be a little bit more clever in this vehicle. Just try and expose yourself a little less. Side scrape where you can, but you've also got to try and maximize getting as many damaging shots as possible, because the DPM, you know, that is the thing that you want to try and get out of this vehicle. So we're going to push into this position here in E3, try and catch someone going to the north, but those ridgelines there are really annoying, and that means that this medium and heavy tank are going to be above us if we are not too careful. We have a medium tank that's pushed in, which is very dangerous. It looks like he's going to be tagged from all sorts of angles, and I'm just waiting for that medium and heavy to pop up above me, try and get a shot at someone to the right, but I don't want to hang around too often. I've got to expose a lot of my tank in order to do so, and we bounce off the AMX-30B2. I'm not too familiar with the armor profile of that tank. It's kind of a little bit troll sometimes with the turret. I'm going to try and get a shot into the side there, but I have no idea why I didn't fire. I could probably have overmatched that tank, and that was a little bit of a misplay for this vehicle, but I don't really have the gun depression to go further forwards and kind of expose myself more round the left or right of this rock. I've just got to be a bit more patient and take my chances with tanks that make a little bit of a mistake. And it kind of leads to a situation in which we are going to be a little bit outnumbered on this flank. And as you can see, we're already 2 tanks behind. We've lost 4 tanks in this battle. I'm trying to chunk down where possible, but at this moment in time, I'm going to have to use the already good reverse speed and what we have improved to try and get out of harm's way. The frontal armor there working alright against a lower caliber gun on that Scorpion 90, and now we're going to fall back a ridge line or a rock line, whatever you want to call it, and then we're just going to poke around and try and get shots in where we can. Try and go through the cupola on this Chieftain 120. I think we just go straight through the front of the turret, showing you the standard penetration isn't too bad with the AMOLAD. And if you saw at the start of all of these battles, the kind of ammo loadout that I am looking at is 2 Hesh rounds. You could carry more, especially if you use the advanced reload or whatever it's called to ammo swap without time penalty. However, I feel it's more important to keep more of the standard and premium rounds, because sometimes you are going to need them in longer drawn out battles. And I'm just trying to take some blind shots through the smoke there. We are now level on tanks, make that we are 1 tank behind. We picked up 3.1k damage, and in another tank like a Chieftain Hybrid 120 or a lot of other tanks, I probably would have dealt a lot more damage. I could be more aggressive on the ridgeline. So what I'm going to do is drop down here. We've lost the kind of 3 line, and then we're going to try and come up with these tanks down here and just flank them again. All about positioning with this vehicle, trying to find positions to make this gun work, and when you do, you can have decent games. But you know, if you want a tank which is just a lot easier to play or a lot more competitive, there are other premium tanks out there that are, you know, more unique and more worth it. One of them being the WZ-122, which we compared this vehicle to in the review at the start of today's video. You have those 80 gems you can use on that vehicle, and the gun, even though it has worse accuracy, it still just feels more consistent, even with worse penetration. I have no idea why that is. I might just be speaking out of my ass, but that's just my experience from today's session in this vehicle. So we're going to pop up here with a shell there because gun depression issues, and I have 2,100 hit points, so I'm just going to come up here, and if I need to tank a shot, I will do. Try and get a sneaky shot there, but the barrel of the dead gun blocks the shot. A little bit frustrating, but we're going to be able to come round the rear of this WZ-122, put a shot into him, and this is a tank that we could deal pretty substantial ramming damage if I actually hit the ram. I miss it like a complete idiot, and now I'm in a very precarious situation, hoping that the WZ-122 hasn't got 80 GMs loaded. Going to go very carefully through the smoke in third person, or first person I should say, trying to go through the sniper view so we can get the jump on that WZ-122, which we just managed to do so. And now it's all about taking out the remaining 2 heavy tanks and light tanks. We can know that 2 of them are over on the 0 line, which leads me to believe the FE-4-211 is probably over there as well. And now we're going to have to utilise the mobility of this vehicle, which is okay. You can see the hull traverse sometimes can mean you catch the corner of buildings. You're so large, you're so easy to spot. Yeah, it's not for me, but as you can see from these gameplays, you can still have relatively decent games. And if you love Iron Maiden, I guess the skin is okay. However, I think the Tier 8 Premium has a better skin and is more unique with the flamethrower mechanic if you play the World War II game mode, that is. But unfortunately, we have lost our M60A1 to the Scorpion 90. Trying to see if I have any shots by auto-aiming, just pressing RB to see if I actually have a shot on the vehicle. Unfortunately, I don't. FE-4-211 can't shoot me, so I'm just going to go all in on this M103A2. He's just fired, we can go for his lower plate, and I'm just going to sit here, and if I need to tank a shot I will, and then that means that we can make sure we make the shot work, take out the M103A2. Our T-72AV takes out the Scorpion 90, which leaves us 3 against the FE-4-211, and I'm just going to go in on this FE-4-211, and hopefully we can deal some damage. He's moved round trying to flank us. He's got lots of hit points left, which I was kind of happy about in this game because we can boost our damage and we can just go through the side of this FE-4-211. Switch to premium, don't really need to fire it, but at this angle the occasional low penetration roll would be a bounce, and I want to get as much damage into this vehicle as possible. Firstly to get a better game, but also because this is still losable with a good player in an FE-4-211. Unfortunately for him, it looks like he struggled there with the amount of tanks that were coming at him, which leads us to get some shots in and push our damage total to a very nice level indeed. We finished MVP in that game. 3 kills, 8k direct damage, 529 assistance. We actually blocked a fair bit, 1000 damage in that game with 1632 base XP. Yeah, coming to a close there on Severogorsk. So another decent profit, a relatively okay silver earner, much more competitive and fun vehicles in my opinion, but if you love Iron Maiden, yeah, it could be good for you, but not for me. Not as competitive as I'd hope. The armour doesn't work as much as I'd like. View range, concealment, you're massive. Gun depression is horrific, and I hate tanks that don't have good gun depression unless they have another great thing like 80 gems or concealment in Era 2. So that's it for my review. I hope you've enjoyed or found it informative. Please leave a like and a comment below. It really helps the channel out, and until next time, I'll see you on the battlefield, and bye for now.